Time to talk some Michigan football here on Mark Rogers TV. The very best way I know to do just that is to bring in Steve Deace from Michigan Podcast to talk up the Wolverines following that, what do we want to call that, Steve? Demoralizing loss in the Outback Bowl?
Complete and total debacle. Brady Hoke era joke performance, and the reaction of the fan base in the days since, I think indicates that we're at a critical mass here. Now, whenever you say that, you know, we live in this day and age where everybody's hired and fired every 3 seconds. Okay, so what I mean by a critical mass is, I mean, Jim has done a masterful job rebuilding our program, Mark. Where it is now, from a season ticket base to a record standpoint, player development, it's not even close. All right, so this is not, you know, if they don't beat Ohio State or don't win the Big Ten, he's fired next year. He's going to get 5 years. Not just the job he's already done, but, you know, then you throw in an extra handicap for being a favorite son and a guy who has earned his place in Michigan football lore. But I do think if we're sitting here 22 months from now and we've gone through a full 5 years and not reached the summit, then I think you're going to see the fan base in open revolt. And I think the opening salvo of that is what happened against South Carolina, a team that Michigan was more than a touchdown favorite against, that by any analytic standard was dramatically inferior to Michigan. And to blow a 19-3 lead, I don't know. You know, Mark, I watch a lot of football. I'm trying to think of the last time I watched a college football game where a team at one point in the game was +3 in turnovers and ended -2, and they did that in less than a quarter and a half. I've never seen anything like that. It was a complete and total meltdown. Brian Monet running out there on the field without his helmet on was reminiscent of the Shane Morris game and Brady Hoke's last year. It was just, it was a Chinese fire drill. It was just not professional. And then you throw in watching the Big Ten go 7-0. And, you know, that's your early game on New Year's Day. So obviously the ratings for that are huge. The entire college football nation is watching, and they showed their ass. It's just a terrible look. And I think that the reaction of the fan base in response to it is indicative of that.
Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast, joining us to talk the Wolverines. And Steve, I watched every play of the game. I'll give you my thought just from a football perspective and not trying to interpret what it means necessarily. And I sit in a much different place than you, obviously, not knowing the personnel as well, but seeing Michigan play 5 or 6 times a year. I saw a team that looked the part of being the 8-point favorite against a South Carolina. So it looked like a 24-10 win in the first quarter. It looked like it was going to be a field goal, then another field goal, then at some point break through and score a touchdown and give South Carolina very little offensively. And it was going to be a fairly ugly 23-9 win, 24-10 win. And it was really the mistake. So I come away from that game still believing Michigan's a better football team than South Carolina. So it's the manner in which they lost for you. So you're putting those mistakes of botching a handoff that went to a tight end at the 20-yard line, the Brandon Peters red zone, end zone interception, those type plays, the fumble inside the 5-yard line that would have made it 26-3, as you so painfully know. You place that more in the hands of Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff than you do the individual players.
I think it's a combination of everything. I mean, we were the youngest team on Phil Steele's experience chart coming into the year. And then you look at the injuries we had on top of that. And I think I told you in the summertime that returning starters has become the most overrated stat in college football if you're recruiting at a high level. And there's about 15 to 20 programs that are recruiting at a reasonable expectation reload level. Michigan under Harbaugh is one of them, but they've only been recruiting that way for 2 full classes since he took over. We forget it's only his 3rd year. And so it really only means 2 full classes because, you know, he took over in January of his first year during a dead period and had 2 weeks to recruit for a coach that had been fired. So that class had blown up. So he's only had really 2 classes. And then you get outside those 15 or 20 schools and everybody else in the developmental program where returning starters matters a little bit more. But I told you in the summer that while I wasn't worried about our minuscule returning starters, what happens is the depth behind those guys. That's where the youth is felt. All right. And so if you have injuries, our starting defensive line was going to be as good as anybody in college footballs, but we didn't have what Ohio State had this year. We had that last year, where the second unit came in and didn't miss a beat, like a hockey line. This year, we didn't have that. And so our depth was sorely tested with that youth. And so, when you go into this bowl game where you have 3 different offensive line starters because of injuries during bowl practices, and it ain't like our offensive line was great to begin with, all right? So now you're plugging in 3 different guys. Steven Spinell is playing center, arguably the most important position on the offensive line, in live action for the first time in his life. So those are things that, as a coaching staff, you can't control. Here's where I do have criticisms of the coaching. You mentioned the tight end handoff. I don't know why we recruit 47 fullbacks and tailbacks in every Jim Harbaugh class to hand the ball to a tight end on 3rd and 1, who then fumbles the football right to South Carolina in what was the final momentum swinging play. I mean, Michigan never recovered any momentum after that. After the game, Harbaugh was asked about that play, and he said, yeah, we had the wrong personnel grouping in there. We blew that as coaches. We should have called a timeout. They asked Brandon Peters about it. And, yeah, he's a redshirt freshman, but that also means he's been through 2 – and he was an early enrollee at Michigan. So he's been through 2 full spring practices, 2 full winter conditionings. This is he's not inexperienced anymore. Mm-hmm. And Brandon Peters, our starting quarterback, admitted that he knew we had the wrong personnel grouping in, but he didn't call timeout because, quote, I just figured Sean McCune, the tight end, would know what to do. Well, fast forward 2 hours later, and I'm watching the Rose Bowl. A true freshman quarterback for Georgia, Jake Fromm. And I'm watching him, not in response to his own team's personnel groupings, but the other team's personnel groupings, changing plays on the field and his team's alignment. Not just from run to pass, but what part of the field they're going to run to, what kind of field alignment they have. And I'm thinking back to what I listened to after the Michigan game, where our coach couldn't call a timeout for that play. Our quarterback, who's had a year more in a system than Jake Fromm has had, admits afterwards he knew they were in the wrong play, but they didn't call a timeout anyway. That is the coaching aspect of it right there, Mark. We did not see the sort of player development you would expect to see for a coaching staff that is making $11 to $13 million a year in total, depending on the metric of salary you want to look at. This is one of the highest paid staffs in the country. And I think, a lot of people, and we've even talked about this in the past, have commented on Harbaugh's demeanor this year, how it was different than other years. And I think that's indicative of knowing something was wrong. I think you're going to see a lot of upheaval on the Michigan coaching staff this offseason very soon. I mean, they've already announced a change in the strength and conditioning program. Ben Herbert, who was groomed by Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin and ran that strength and conditioning program there for several years, and then left to go to Arkansas with Brett Bielema. He's coming in to take that over. I think you'll see the entire offensive coaching staff at Michigan gutted, either reassigned or removed. And so I think Jim recognizes, we're wasting our defense here. And you look at Don Brown, he's a tremendous defensive coordinator. He's also 62 years old, so he's probably in a 10-year gig, Mark. And so I think when you got a gem like Don Brown, I think Jim recognizes that his side of the football has got to substantially raise its level of play to take advantage of a roster that, when you look at 2018 and 2019, this is now when the full fruits of Harbaugh's initial recruiting boost comes into play. We've got so many guys coming back. Chase Winovich just announced he's returning, and with him and Rashawn Gary, a defensive end. Those two together, that's reminiscent of the kind of stuff we've seen from Florida State's and Miami's in eras past. Those are 2 terrors coming off the edge, but you can't ask them to win every game 14-10. The other team, Ohio State's recruiting machine ain't shutting down. They are stacking classes unlike any team I've seen from the Midwest since probably the Lou Holtz era at Notre Dame, when they lowered their recruiting standards and were stacking classes in that era. So they're not going away. Michigan State's not going away. Wisconsin's not going away. Penn State's not going away. So Michigan needs to up its game, and it's enough. It's time for enough talk, enough reality shows, enough podcasts. It's time to win some damn games. games that matter, because we're winning a lot of games. We need to start winning the games that really matter now.
So I don't want to make too much out of the one play to McEwen on the 3rd and 1, but if I remember correctly, it was either after the first touchdown South Carolina scored or maybe the second. So it was either 19-9 or 19-16. I don't remember which.
It was 19-9. That was the play that, or there was 19-16, and that was the play where they took the lead.
Sure. So there you go. So it's also a lack of understanding of the game situation, that this team is on the brink of, they've got the momentum, and you're on the brink of being able to at least manage the situation, get yourself a first down, get your footing back, and be able to mount a drive.
Well, let me look at some of these. Mark, he's lost 11 games at Michigan, Jim has. 7 of those, they had second-half leads. Our last 2 games, we blew 14-0 leads and 19-3 leads.